Good day, everyone. Module 1 topics are almost done. We are now down to our last topic, the lesson 4, which is the global interstate system. Today, a video lecture will be discussed, and I want you to pay attention because some of the questions for your midterm exam are mostly explanation and discussion type to test if you learned something from the video presentation posted.
I'll show you our goals for this lecture, which are as follows. So at the end of this video lecture, you are expected to first understand the difference between a nation and a state, define a nation state, explain effects of globalization on nation states, categorize institutions that govern international relations, and last is differentiate internationalism from globalism. So without further ado, let's tackle the first two goals by answering what is a nation, a state, and a nation state. Okay, as defined by Weber, a state is a compulsory political organization with a centralized government that maintains the legitimate use of force within a certain territory. So from this definition alone, we can already come up with the elements which comprises a state. So merong mga elements. What are those? First, it should have a centralized government or the government. So what is a government? Well, government is the governing body of the state. So it is a system or group of people which performs basically the two most important functions, which is the legislative and then the executive power within a certain territory. Next, a state must have a sovereignty. So what is this? This is the supreme authority within a territory. In the definition, the terms used there are legitimate use of force, meaning yung power mo is legit, it's legal. You can impose the rules because the authority is yours. Walang magki-question nun na ibang country. You will not depend on other countries for the implementation of a certain policy or law. Other elements also include a territory and the population, and these two are as important as government and sovereignty, because when you don't have territory, you cannot be called a state. Territory is usually becomes the identity of a state. Say for instance, the Philippines. As Filipinos, we are known for our country. Even the Russians, even the Americans. So we are always linked with our territory. So that's very important to a state. However, before, people are not really conscious whether a certain territory is already a state. In fact, most groups of people are classified as a nation. Even in the biblical times, they always use this term, yung nation, to identify a certain group of people. So, what is a nation? Defined by Shatta, nation is a concept that emphasizes the organic ties that hold groups of people together and inspire a sense of loyalty and belongingness. So, what are these ties that bind people together? It can be the ethnicity, language, religion, culture, even beliefs. When people share the same beliefs, you can already call that a nation. So, a nation is more on the relationship of people in that particular group. So, can you see now the difference between these two concepts, nation and state? Kung hindi pa masyadong clear, then I'll be showing you these differences. First, a state is a legal and political entity, while a nation is a socio-cultural entity. A state is linked to a territory, whereas a nation is linked to a group of people. In a state, sovereignty exists, while in a nation, it may not. A state is established consciously, while a nation can be created unconsciously. And lastly, a state is united by laws, whereas nations are united by bond and shared history. So what do you think? Which is a better concept? Is it being a state or being a nation? Well, obviously, both of them have advantages. For instance, the state, it focuses on the legality of things. Say, for instance, there are a lot of nations that you cannot call a state because they have to reach certain characteristics na na-mention natin kanina, yung 4 elements. These nations that does not have a state, we call them stateless nation. One good example of a stateless nation is the Palestine. So, bakit stateless nation ang Palestine? Because they don't have their own territory. So, bakit naman? How is that possible? Because they used to live in Israel. However, the Israel people, because they want the country to be a full Jew country. So, yung mga Palestine which are Arabs, gusto nila na paalisin yon. So, yung mga Palestinians naman, they claim that the Israel is their territory. Kasi to date back, mas marami yung mga Palestinians doon sa territory. So, that's the case. Nagkaroon sila, until now, nagkakaroon ng conflict between them for the fight of territory. Another example of a stateless nation are the Kurds from Kurdistan. Actually, if you're gonna look at the map, hindi mo talaga makikita ang country na Kurdistan. So same with the Palestinians, they lack territory. That's why they are called stateless nations. At the present, the Kurds are living within the borders or outside the borders of Armenia, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey as shown in the picture. A little trivia about the Kurds. They only began to consider the creation of their homeland, which they referred as Kurdistan, early 20th century. That's why it's a new concept, and there is no territory. That's why you cannot find them on the map. Example of that is Mexico. They became a state on January 1912, but after that and onwards, they were struggling to bind the people. Bakit naman? Because as you all know, Mexico has a very diverse culture. There are a lot of different ethnic groups within the territory, and these people don't speak the same language. Now, how did they overcome these struggles? As time goes by, they were able to find pieces of history, pieces of culture that they all can relate into. So, kahit na iba-iba yung languages nila, iba-iba yung ethnicity nila, iba-iba yung religion nila, they were able to patch that as time goes by. With the challenges as being a nation or as being a state, there comes another concept that comes into light. So, ano yon? That is the concept of a nation-state. So, what is a nation-state? As defined, this refers to modern countries and their political apparatuses rules over a single nation. It is also a political community that emanates from civic society to legitimately execute peace. In other words, this is a happy marriage between a nation and a state. So the nation-state just basically combines the characteristic of a nation and a state. As you can observe in the picture, yung presence ng government, ng sovereignty and territory mixed with a band of people, that makes a nation-state. And compared with the two concepts that we discussed a while ago, nation-state as one entity has an advantage. That's why more and more countries are really doing their best to be recognized as a nation state. One good reason why countries prefer to be nation states because it is said to bring peace and order within their territory or within the country. But we know better. As we can observe, it's not always the case. Peace is not always evident in all nation states around us. In short, they also struggle to become nation states. So bakit naman? Because they're open to more challenges as they progress on being a nation state. So let's go back to the topic. Specifically, our concern in this video is explaining the effects of globalization on nation states, categorizing institutions that govern international relations, and differentiating internationalism from globalism. But first, let's revisit the definition of the term nation state. Now, in the first video, we mentioned that a nation state is a political entity and it emanates from civic society to legitimately execute peace. That's why from a nation to a state, countries became more and more interested to achieve this political community to become a nation state. However, we know that nation states cannot perfectly execute peace and order in their respective territory. That's why we have news about the coup d'etat in Myanmar. In China, we also have issues on genocide. And in the Philippines, we also have our own versions of conflicts here. Now, what does this imply? This only means that even reaching the status of becoming a nation state, countries still struggles or faces challenges because of globalization. So globalization is part of that struggle. And we will be discussing that one by one. For instance, Arjun Aparuday in 1996 described nation-state as a complex modern political form that is on its last legs. So what does that idiom mean? If you have not yet seen a chair on its last leg, I think this is somewhat similar to that, only that this still has 3 more legs. Now the point is when something is on its last leg, it's near the end of life or it's unbalanced and unstable. And that's what exactly Aparuday is trying to tell with regards to nation states. Supporting that argument, Kenichi Ome claimed that the 2 factors of nation states, which are economic interdependence and global communication, is somewhat on its nostalgic fiction, meaning something that we only reminisce. Another struggle identified by James Rosenau is the conflicting roles of supranational integration and local fragmentation. And when these forces meet, of course, that would cause a problem or a friction on nation states. And since in globalization, you would want to keep your relationships with other countries as smooth as possible in terms of economy and politics, you would want to be respected abroad to gain that. However, as doing so, according to Hans Schattel, you are also sacrificing your legitimacy at home, meaning nationality can be fragmented as to gaining recognition in the global arena. a fine example to that is the dispute over the Scarborough Shoal. Of course, we knew since 2016 that the United Nations voted in favor of the Philippines in the arbitrary case over South China Sea. However, China still refused to accept the decision given by the United Nations. So what would be the impact of this? Of course, in the international level or in the global level, countries would feel, if not all, at least most of them would think that they're being disrespectful for not heeding the decisions of an intergovernmental body, which is the United Nations. But in the local level, they might think that they're only exercising their sovereignty, and people in China may be in favor of that. So meaning, like what Hans Schattel have stated before, which we flashed before on the screen, that there's something sacrificed if they want to be legitimate at home. Their respectability abroad will be stained, and if they prioritize respectability abroad, their legitimacy at home will suffer. Do you get what I'm saying? So in short, if we will summarize the challenges identified by various experts and scholars that are faced by the nation states today, is that there is an imbalance in applying globalism and nationalism because of globalization. In reality kasi, globalism repels nationalism, which Ernest Gellner believes that a very integral part of a nation state because it holds the political and national unit in parallel or congruent. That said, what now are the effects of globalization on nation states? We will be mentioning 5 effects in this video, and the first one is imposing forced choice upon nation states. Well, nation states, they have economic sovereignty, meaning they can have the say on whether they would open the market outside the world, meaning if they will be accepting trade or investment outside the country from foreign investors or foreign negotiations. So they can have the say to that. However, if they refused investments outside the country, or they fail to embrace free market principles, such as the term we use here, neoliberalism, their country will suffer. They will run the risk of being left behind in terms of development. So even though they have the power to refuse or say so, still, this neoliberalism or this free market principles are being forcibly imposed to them. Wala silang choice but to accept and embrace that. Kaya nga, si Thomas Friedman, he coined the term golden straitjacket to describe how states are now forced into policies. Of course, this is not only applicable to the neoliberalism or the economic aspect or economic effect of globalization to nation states. So that's what they are imposed to or forced to do because they have to embrace neoliberalism. So next is the establishment of economic and political integrations. This actually is a positive effect on nation state because they become a part of an intergovernmental organization that cares for their members. They have programs and political and economic interventions to make sure that the member countries or the member nation states are well taken care of. An example of this economic and political integration is the European Union. It was founded in 1951, and the main goal is to have a economical cooperation on its member countries. Currently, they have 27 member countries, which I will not be mentioning na. So you can do it on your own. But a quick trivia, this 27 countries uses the same official currency, and that is euro. Third is the establishment of international laws and principles. The largest intergovernmental organization that we have is the United Nations, and over the years it has been responsible to air the differences of the member nations and they're trying to resolve them in a forum. And they have 6 main bodies, which are the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the Trusteeship Council, the International Court of Justice, and the UN Secretariat. Each body performs different functions, such as the UN's ICC, or International Criminal Court, prosecutes individuals accused of crimes against humanity such as genocide. Aside from these main bodies, United Nations also established universally accepted principles. The first one is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and we also have the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. Now, fourth is the rise of transnational activism, or TNA. This happens when activist groups of nation states connect with their counterparts in other states. For example, an advocacy-based organization in the Philippines, for instance, may connect itself and get support from other human rights groups in Europe to pressure the Philippine government, say for instance, to realign its stance and actions in upholding human rights. And when a nation state recognizes international interventions and changes relationship among the nation state, its citizens, and international actors, this may bring a positive change or an immediate action to the cause they are fighting for. Now, last but not the least is the creation of new communication networks. Because of globalization, it has become possible to interact and learn more about other countries, their social, economic, and political difficulties or struggles. A tool that enhances this communication is the internet and technology, and because of that they can exchange political perspectives through this medium or media. And one good example of how effective this new communication of network is what happened they call it Arab Spring. They call it Arab Spring because this began in the spring of 2011. And this is a series of pro-democracy uprising which happened in largely Muslim countries including Tunisia, Morocco, Syria, Libya, Egypt, and Bahrain. Now, most of the leaders in these countries are not pro-democracy. For instance, in Tunisia, a certain event that led to the uprising was not aired on the television because it was controlled by the government. So what they did is they captured those who have recorded or videoed the moment or the event was able to upload it on social media, on Facebook, and other people were able to see that. Thus, the series of uprising began. So because of these events, clearly there should have an intervention. So what govern international relation? We call it intergovernmental organizations or IGOs. And the main of establishing this organization is to foster strong economic, political, cultural, educational, and technical intergovernmental relationships. IGOs are very important to nation states because they create a mechanism for the world's inhabitants to work more successfully together in the areas of peace and security, and they also deal with economic and social questions. So examples of IGOs as seen on the screen are United Nations, Association of Southeast Asian Nations or ASEAN. You also have EU or European Union and World Trade Organization. You also have or NATO or North Atlantic Treaty Organization is also an IGO or International Governmental Organization, also International Criminal Court, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries or OPEC. So there are a lot. I listed only 7 here. Now, what does these IGOs do to the member countries? Let's take an instance, the ASEAN. So how does ASEAN enhances economic, political, cultural, educational, and technical relations among its members? And more importantly, do they always intervene on its member countries? Well, the members of ASEAN are Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Singapore, Indonesia, Laos, Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, and Brunei Darussalam. And while they are an intergovernmental organization, which means they have or they can intervene in the political, economic, educational, and cultural aspect or technical aspect of these countries, they very much respect the sovereignty of member countries, while keeping the close relationship in economic, social, and cultural aspect of the region. Speaking of relationships among countries, we have 2 terms that describe the possible relationships that globalization was able to create, and these are internationalism and globalism. But what are the differences between these 2? Well, if you're going to look at the dictionary, international is more on your relating to or affecting 2 or more countries, whereas global is more on relating to or involving the entire world. So in the coverage or the limitation of these 2, the greater range is on the global side. Technically speaking, internationalism is more concerned on the opinion that nationalism should be outrun because links that bind people of different countries are more powerful than those that disconnect them. Whereas in globalism, this is rooted on the concept or a concept that emerged as an attitude that seeks to understand all the interconnections of the modern world and to highlight patterns that underlie them. So that concludes our discussion on the part 2 of the global interstate system. I hope you learned something in this video, and I hope that it helped your current online studies. So let's answer this question. Why call the world an interstate system? 2 Filipino authors answered that question as this. It is a facet of contemporary political organization that seeks to form collaboration among nation-states through the establishment of intergovernmental organizations. Yes, it is very timely that we recognize a global interstate system because nation-states nowadays are all affected by globalization. They are all facing similar struggles, and the effects of globalization is universal. Therefore, it creates a universal solution. Again,